Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth conversation in the Wallace Foundation series, Reimagining the Future of the Arts. I'm Bahia Ramos, Director of Arts at the Wallace Foundation, where our mission is to foster equitable improvements in learning and enrichment for young people and in the arts for everyone. In all of our work, our goal is to generate benefits for the small number of organizations we can fund directly, and for the field more broadly by developing and sharing credible, relevant knowledge. Today, we're going to explore how and why Americans of all racial and ethnic backgrounds connect to arts, culture, and creativity. First, we'll hear from Madeline Smith, a project director for Slover Linnet Audience Research, which specializes in the arts and culture sector. Madeline will share some key takeaways from Centering the Picture, an outgrowth of a major survey released in July. Culture and Community in a Time of Crisis was a special edition of the long-standing Culture Track series, co-developed with the strategy and marketing firm LaPlaca Cohen. It was one of, if not the largest tracking study exclusively on the attitudes and behaviors of US cultural consumers during the pandemic. Centering the Picture goes one step further. It takes that survey data and mines it to focus on the perspectives of people of color who may have been underrepresented in such conversations in the past. The researchers hope the new data will be used as a tool to answer questions such as, what is my organization's responsibility toward equity? While acknowledging that no group is a monolith, the research begins with the premise, what can we learn from the data to reach broader, more diverse audiences in ways that will be meaningful to them? We recognize that there are no easy answers, but we do hope the conversation, including your own questions, will help to stimulate our collective thinking on a topic we know you're already thinking about. So after Madeline highlights the key points from the survey, we'll talk with 3 visionary arts leaders to reflect on what they heard in the data and to share their thoughts on a way forward. Anna Glass is the executive director of Dance Theater of Harlem. Through performances, community engagement, and arts education, the company and school advance their mission of empowerment through arts for all. Josephine Ramirez is the executive vice president of the Music Center Arts located in Los Angeles. She works with a team to curate, commission, and create dance and public programs, as well as arts education of the highest caliber with a comprehensive focus on engagement. And Nancy Yao Masbach is the president of the Museum of Chinese in America located in New York City. The museum celebrates the living history of the Chinese experience in America by preserving and sharing 200 years of history, heritage, culture, and diverse experiences. During our conversation, your questions are welcome at any time. Please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and we'll respond to as many as possible toward the end of the discussion. Today's discussion is being recorded and will be available at wallacefoundation.org. There you'll find today's presentation slides, links to this report, as well as past event recordings. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Madeline Smith to share some key findings from that special edition of Culture Track, Centering the Picture, the role of race and ethnicity in cultural engagement. Madeline, welcome.
Thanks, Bahia, and thank you to the Wallace Foundation for having us all here today. Before we jump into the key findings, I just wanted to take a moment to share more about the background of the study. At the outset of the coronavirus pandemic in early 2020, we at Slover Linnet wanted to know how we could help the field during all of this. And we believed a shared picture of what people are going through during this time would help organizations know how to respond to the crisis. To that end, we designed a survey meant to understand what people are going through, if and where the arts fit into their lives at a time like this, and if and how arts organizations can help. We were overwhelmed by the level of engagement we had and received 124,000 responses to our survey. The survey was fielded to 2 groups of people, a consumer panel sample, described on the left side of the screen, which was representative of the US general population. And then the survey was also sent to a list sample made up of 650 different arts organizations that agreed to send the survey to a portion of their list. As this graphic shows, the survey was sent to a wide range of organizations, including museums and collections, which includes not only museums, but zoos, aquaria, botanical gardens, and others. performing arts organizations, which includes theater, dance, opera, and others, art schools, visual arts and photography practitioners, and film, radio, and television organizations. Today, I'll be sharing 3 key takeaways from our study centering the picture, focused on desire for change, what people want more of in their lives, and the role of digital during the pandemic. Our survey included a range of agree and disagree statements, one of which was meant to measure desire for change in the cultural sector. We asked people if they hoped arts and culture organizations would change after the pandemic to be more relevant to people like them. And as you can see on that chart, on the next slide, we found that the level of interest in future change at arts and culture organizations is significantly influenced by race and ethnicity, with several BIPOC communities. So by BIPOC, I mean Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities more likely to want change than white or Caucasian Americans. As you can see, respondents from 3 racial and ethnic groups, Asian or Pacific Islander, Black or African American, and Hispanic or Latinx, were more likely to hope change occurs than the overall population. Not only did we want to understand desire for change, but also types of change, which would make arts organizations better for people in the future. And our analysis indicated that desire for change towards inclusivity and community was the most desired type of change for all Americans, but that the desire for this type of change is even higher among BIPOC Americans. When we talk about inclusivity and community-centered, we mean things like supporting local artists, friendlier to all kinds of people, and a deeper focus on the local community. So while you can see that about 50% of Americans who identify as white or Caucasian indicated this is a type of change they hope to see, the desire for this change is much higher among other racial and ethnic groups, ranging anywhere from 76 to 63% of people in certain racial and ethnic groups indicating this is something they want. While interest isn't quite as strong, there's also interest in organizations becoming more casual and fun, which includes qualities like less formal, more fun, and more child-friendly, which is particularly important to Hispanic or Latinx respondents, as well as multiracial and Asian or Pacific Islanders. And some Americans would like to see organizations change towards content that's more reflective and innovative, meaning stories that are connected to their own lives, or more frequent changes in exhibitions and new works. This change is particularly important to Asian or Pacific Islanders, as well as multiracial or Native Americans. Given the new circumstances we were living under with the pandemic and lockdowns in early 2020, we also hoped to understand what people wanted more of in their lives generally, and found that Black or African Americans expressed a unique set of desires. You can see on this table, maybe focusing on the overall column far to the left, most Americans are looking for the same 3 things. They wanted to get outside, have fun, and connect with other people. But if we look at Black or African American respondents, what they miss looks a little bit different. Having fun remains important, but it's most important for them to stay informed with trusted information. And they also miss having hope and humor in their lives during a time like this. For our last takeaway, I wanted to share a little bit more about the role of digital in people's lives. And we found indications that online digital offerings by cultural organizations are reaching people who have not visited the same kind of cultural organization in the past year. So if we look at a specific cultural activities, we kind of think of it as there could be 3 ways that people are engaging. Let's maybe use an art museum as an example. So on the left of this Venn diagram, there are those who have attended an art museum in person in 2019, but haven't engaged with an art museum digitally during the pandemic. There are those in the middle who may have been in person to an art museum during 2019 and have also engaged in some digital offerings provided during the pandemic. And then there's a small portion of American adults who hadn't attended an art museum in person in the past year, but had participated in a digital offering from an art museum, suggesting that these digital offerings may be reaching new people or maybe re-engaging people who hadn't visited something in person in quite some time. To give some examples of this, you'll see when we look at people who engaged online with an online or digital offering from a natural history museum during the pandemic, 57% of those had not been to a natural history museum in the last year. Again, if we look at people who chose to engage with the digital offering offered by a classical music group, 35% of those had not been in the last year. And looking at those who engaged with the digital offering from a dance group, 55% had not been in the last year. Again, indications that digital offerings may be engaging new people, re-engaging people. And then as you'll see in our report, there are also indications that these new people, these digital offerings are engaging, may tend to be more racially or ethnically diverse than the type of people who come to these in-person events. Before I pass it over to the panelists, I just wanted to offer some final thoughts about our report. We found that BIPOC Americans are more likely than white or Caucasians to endorse social purposes in the arts and see more roles arts organizations could play in their communities. When we think about some of those things we were talking about as it relates to future change, BIPOC Americans are more likely to want organizations to support local artists and organizers. They want organizations to support their local community members by treating their employees fairly and equitably, and by helping their community members heal, grieve, and process their emotions. During this time, we're really encouraging organizations to experiment with new ways of engaging and supporting community members. Are there ways organizations' existing programming and experiences can be made more locally centered and welcoming? Ways it can be more casual and fun and family friendly? Maybe ways that it can become more relevant and reflective of people's stories and local identities? And lastly, there are indications that barriers to digital engagement may be lower than barriers to in-person attendance. So we're encouraging people to shift their thinking away from how can we make digital experiences more like in-person experiences, to how can we make in-person experiences more like digital ones, which are engaging new and different types of people. Thank you, and I encourage you all to read the full report centering the picture. Here are just some of the key findings from the survey, which we hope will be useful to the arts field. I'll now pass it back to Bahia.
Thanks, Madeline. Thank you so much for that overview, and thanks to Slover Lynette for that valuable piece of research for the field. I'd like to welcome the three arts leaders who have built relationships with the audiences that the arts sector hopes to engage more deeply. We're pleased to have with us Anna Glass of Dance Theater of Harlem, Josephine Ramirez of the Music Center Arts in LA, and Nancy Yao Mausbach of the Museum of Chinese in America, known as MoCA. First, thank you all for joining us today. It's great to have you here. And I'm going to just ask a couple of questions of each of you, and then we'll open it up for a larger Q&A, but I'm going to start with Anna. The research from Slover Lynette really paints a broad picture of what diverse audiences want from arts organizations. In addition to the arts itself, Blacks and African Americans said they want arts organizations to help their communities stay informed with trusted information and even help them grieve and heal during this time of COVID-19 and racial unrest. What is to say about the role of cultural organizations for many communities of color from your perspective?
Well, I think anyone who has been or is leading a culturally specific institution is not surprised by that data. I think it's something that we have always known has been an integral part of our organizations. It's why we exist for many of us, that we were born out of community. I think it's also not a surprise to many in the funding community. I think where the opportunity lies is having our elected officials, our governments understand the role that organizations like ours play within our communities. I think there are some really wonderful and interesting policy shifts that are possible. When we're in the thick of it with the pandemic, and we saw many of our communities struggling with food insecurity. Many of our organizations were opening our doors, and we were becoming centers that were distributing food. I think that we have always been these places that while we are arts and cultural institutions and we are creators, I think we are also institutions that are reflecting back what we experience and what we see in our communities.
Thank you for that. I mean, I wonder if I appreciate your comment about kind of the policy implications and public interest of this. And I wonder if there are some nuances that might not come across in the survey, and what other kinds of questions arts leaders and researchers might want to ask about this issue.
Absolutely. So, I'd like to delve more into that question that our communities, the Black community especially, want our organizations to be sources of information. I'd want to ask what kind of information. Is it information about employment? Is it information about opportunities? We see so many of our institutions, Dance Theater of Harlem sees it, many of our institutions in Harlem see this, that, we are opportunities for independent artists to express themselves. These institutions serve as hubs and incubators for the artistic community, but at the same time, we serve as spaces, as safe spaces for our community to congregate, to come together. And so that's one piece that I would want to understand a bit more, which I think would be helpful in the policy arena and shaping how our government officials interact with our organizations, is what kind of information are our communities looking for? And then similarly, our community is looking for hope. I would want to delve into that a bit more. How do they experience hope through our organizations? What does that look like specifically for them? So those are the two pieces that I would want to push a bit more, get more information, more data around that.
Thank you. I think in thinking about this change, Nancy, the survey found that the desire for change in cultural institutions is higher among Asian American, Black, and Latinx audiences than among whites and other groups. What are the most significant kinds of change arts organizations can make? Is it around this notion of community orientation? Is it content? Is it something else? What do you think is a good place to start for this?
Thanks, Bia, and I just love Anna's answer. So I'm just going to piggyback on some of that to really think about what came out of that survey in terms of desire for change. I don't even think it's desire for change, because in some ways when I heard that, it comes from a certain perspective, right? You've all got the resources and now let's just shift and change. The reality of the situation for, I think, a lot of BIPOC, smaller culturals is, it's not a desire, it is an urgency. And it's an opportunity, and we're not sure if it's going to come up again. So the truth is, it's very nice to frame it in desire for change. I want to, have a new outfit or something like that. But I really think, at least from our seat at MoCA, there is a massive urgency. And also just because of all that's happened in 2020, right? With the situation around George Floyd, allyship, with BLM, with xenophobia, with you name the issue that has come up in 2020. And unfortunately, is this the same story we've heard? And yet you see change for 6 months, 7 months, and then you're afraid it's going to go away. So I think it's really interesting, the timing of this report happening right then in the smack in the middle of it. But, I already feel like some of the issues that we were placing as the highest, utmost priority are a little bit check the box these days because we've moved on. And I think, that's the kind of thing, like inclusivity, community, casual, engagement, relatively, absolutely. And so many of us, like Anna said, we started from the community level, but you know what? That's also tricky, right? Because yes, we want to embrace the community at all times, 100% community, but we also need to be sustainable. So how do you measure and balance that, the reality of your situation? We're in New York City. We've got to get tourism through the door. Otherwise we can't pay the rent or the electricity bill or anything else. When there's a nascent sense of philanthropy, it may be communities that you serve. How do you then also get, your sustainability under your belt? It's such a tricky tension, but I do believe, at least at MoCA, we are trying our best. And we have such a small staff, so the resources are always an issue, right? But we want to be 100% local community. And to be honest, we're not doing a great job now because we do as well as we can. And we understand that the mission is to preserve the history, and we do that mission critical work. But do we wish we could have artists in residence, organizations in residence? Do we feel like, yes, and the dream of that is in the near term reality. But right now, it's really hard because we don't have the resources to do all that. 100% local, 100% national, because there's no other MoCA that's doing as broad as work as we're doing. And we want to serve as a resource to others. And then 100% international, mostly for sustainability, because it's a $3 billion industry in New York City. And when it all comes back, sooner than later, everyone, let's hope and work for that. 60 million people will be coming to New York City.
Right.
So it's hard. I think, and the word is, it's not desire, it's urgency.
Urgency. And I think in the midst of all this, right, in the pandemic, we're all at home, in walks digital, right? In walks this thing called the digital opportunity. And Josephine, I know that like this pivot to digital performances may have opened up to some new doors to new audiences and maybe created some thread of sustainability and for an organization. But how are you thinking about this opportunity, you know, during not just the shutdowns, but beyond into like this potential reopening?
I think all of us, I mean, first of all, the findings in the report really resonate with a lot of the processes that we went through, you know, in spring 2020. Mm-hmm. And sort of like what Nancy was talking about, you know, we're in a different phase of living in this pandemic right now. We were always leaning into free and low cost events. We operate a large outdoor park and a large plaza. So we already had a lot of those things going. When we had to shut down, like a lot of organizations, we like figure it out quick, you know, how do we make this into a digital event, right? And like a lot of organizations, we sort of, you know, tumbled through that, getting better and better as we did it. And now we're at a different phase of looking to, okay, we don't soon, hopefully, have to do this all the time anymore. So what is the future of that skill set and the advantages of digital that we learned? Again, resonated in the work that you guys produced. How do we sort of take the best of that and the people that we were able to engage? And I'm speaking, you know, as a field too, not just as us. We're trying to figure out what innovations can we make to really pull that out with us into the future and keep our chops up, you know, keep our chops with digital at a level that will maintain and sort of help us to grow with it. Because I think a lot of organizations, one of the big issues in the field at large has been our kind of reluctance and slow uptake to digital in the first place before all this happened. So this allowed us an opportunity to just sort of cram, you know, do some cramming and studying and kind of get that skill. Now we have it, let's do something with it.
Yeah, have you seen ways in which it's deepened your practice in connecting with your community and engaging others?
Absolutely. I'm thinking back to, you know, when George Floyd was murdered and this roiling we went through in society, and we had, you know, like protests in our park, and we had all kinds of things going on. In the middle of it, we were trying to do a digital 4th of July celebration. And we really struggled with it because you know, typically we get, you know, 70,000 people outside, you know, partying. And this was a somber moment to be trying to, you know, and so we really, that's the brilliance of the work that we do in arts and culture. We can take and make meaning with what this medium that we have. And so we really leaned into and looked more at what is liberty, what is justice, and tried to come up with a product, a video product that wasn't about, you know, flag waving in the sort of stereotypical sense, but coming from community members, what peace, justice, liberty, pursuit of happiness means to people. And I think these are the moments where we can take those opportunities to really mine this richness that we have in the arts and in content making and meaning making to make a different kind of product for people that really is relevant.
Yeah. I think that, you know, in the survey, they talked about how a third of the digital audience hadn't visited places physically before. And I'm sure you're all thinking about how you begin, you know, Anna, how do you begin to like make meaning of the physical experience and that transition from digital as you welcome folks back in? Have you started thinking about what that invitation might look like and how it differs from what they've been experiencing thus far?
Absolutely. I think, you know, the data that came out of the study that speaks to this particular issue is correct. You know, fun fact, we saw, we pivoted to digital. We created a program called DTH On Demand. In one night, we had 30,000 viewers watching Creole Giselle, more than we could have had in a theater. We had over 400,000 viewers watching our gala, a third of which came from Brazil. We have now students that are enrolled in our school that are in the Bahamas. They're from the Bahamas, they're from the UK, they're from Italy, they're from California. You know, there's really no going back. You know, there is no shutting down the digital platform and going back to in person. And so we are thinking about ways in which we maintain those relationships, these new relationships, because they in many ways are new audiences for us. You know, certainly we are going to be continuing virtual education through our school, but also are looking at ways in which, how do we give additional value to those people that are not in the tri-state area? Do we send out company members to the West Coast or to Italy to do weekend long intensive? So people are also getting an in-person touch point as well as the digital touch point. But with those kind of numbers and sort of the realization that while, you know, I think that the immediate concern was that digital sort of flattens the experience. Well, what we saw was that it also, that the flip side of it was that it gave more people the opportunity to learn and to experience and to witness. And so, you know, I think that we are constantly in conversation around how do we maintain that? What do we want to do? Which is exciting, frankly. It's an exciting moment to be able to dream a bit around, you know, what does this look like for us?
Yeah. And I think in thinking about maintaining, you have to think about how you prioritize for that, right? What goes first? What do you keep, right? And Nancy, you've had the kind of double impact of the pandemic on top of the challenge of a fire that, you know, that is taking has its own recovery process, right? As an institution, and you can't do business as usual. It's not that the doors open and then that's kind of it. You just resume. And I wonder, in this sense of maintenance, what you're trying to prioritize and why, and is it based on what people are responding to, and what kinds of things can people learn from your recovery as a result?
And we're still going through it, but
Yes.
thank you for that. And, you know, I just want to thank anyone who has reached out to us around the fire. It was just about a year ago, and you know, the process in which, and, you know, also to the Mellon Foundation in particular, they really sort of said, pause, stop, reflect. How are you going to conserve your artifacts? And I think, again, being a small cultural with not a lot of resources, the whole thing's so daunting. So we did recover 98% of the artifacts from the building, which is a miracle in and of itself.
Yes.
And a lot of efforts by volunteers, the community, just outpouring of support. 98%, it's all now in one place. So I will say, during this shutter time, we were able to project manage, and some things like, so we have a new website. Check it out, mocanyc.org. So we project managed that with one of the curators, because the curation had less workload. You know, we basically multitasked and had people project lead things that we weren't able to do for years. So we have a new website, amazing group workshops helped us with that. And then the other curator, Herb Tam, he project led the opening of the MoCA workshop. Because what one doesn't realize is, when there's a fire and all the artifacts are extracted, you actually have to rehouse them somewhere. And the process of rehousing things and getting them all together from 4 different locations, assessing their damage, putting them all in a place that actually won't then further damage them. We had to outfit an entirely new space, find a space, outfit a space, and actually bring back all the materials. So for a small team of 13, just in this period of doing that, our minds were, you know, our eyes are just glazed over with just that work. But we were able to bring everything together. And I will say the path to conservation is most likely 5 years for that collection to be fully restored. And again, anyone on this call, get insurance. because God forbid something like this happens to you. And we had cut our insurance because we thought we could save money on a little bit of the monthly expenses, and that was clearly a mistake in hindsight. But I think I have to applaud the MOCA team. You know, we're so small, but we're so mighty. And I think all of our teams have been like that in this period of time. You know, just the mental toll, the health toll, everyone. I was talking to a partner in China, and I just said, you know, the big difference is I think everyone in the US is in some form of mourning, right? And we all know someone who's passed away, but we're just not processing it. And, you know, so give people a lot of space to do that. And I just think being number one, people first, and caring for people on the team, you know, it's so hard because this you want to be able to listen now, you wanted people to care, but then you're like, I should be more productive. But I think at this time we're just making sure that we're trying to prioritize, we're trying to get some projects done, but most importantly we want to make sure we're caring for the team overall. And I think that is the broader sense of the approach to recovery that we need to be mindful of. And I don't even know how to prepare for the future, but the future is not known.
Thank you for that. I you know, there's so much at stake for our communities and for our organizations, and then for leaders. And with all the information, you know, at our doorstep, and thinking about the legacies of our institutions and leadership and our teams, Josephine, I wonder how do you begin to understand what you need to do to support your community? Where does that information come from you? How is it just a gut reaction to something? Is it just the knowing? Is it the feeling? Is it, you know, where does that come from for you?
It's rooted in our mission and our vision about deepening cultural life for people in LA County. We're a county supported cultural institution. And Los Angeles County in particular, you've all heard the news. We've not fared very well. We're and the most devastating piece of it for me personally too is that it's hitting the Latino communities harder than anybody else is. That is who we serve. It is our so-called majority minority in Los Angeles, and we're paid for by the people. Largely, you know, we get a lot of private donations too, but you know, we're here for the people of LA County. That's who we're here to serve. I think the layer that COVID has sort of forced on us as arts institutions is, how do we also become, kind of to Nancy's point, on a macro scale, how do we also fulfill our roles and our responsibility to our artist community and our creative community in the midst of a crisis? How do we keep people employed? How do we bring meaning to the people who are giving meaning? Do you know what I mean? I feel like there's a when we're operating in healthier circumstances, we take that almost for granted. We're a lifeline. We're as a large institution with a deep focus and commitment to community and the public, we provided employment to over 1,000 local artists in the pandemic, and over 50 artist groups, a lot of them community-based groups that we've been able to give work through the digital work that we're doing. So leaning into what we can do to keep our own community healthy so that they in turn can survive and thrive to do the work that they help us do for the people. That's kind of where I get my inspiration, is to make sure that we continue as a strong outward facing institution and provide some replenishment and resilience for the people we depend on to do the service that we're here to do. I hope that makes sense, but it's a very kind of soulful response to where we all need to be at a time of crisis as arts and culture providers. And if I can just add, we have a real commitment with other stakeholder county organizations to try to see what we can do collectively. This is county parks, libraries, museums, and us, to address the public mental health issues of people in LA County coming out of COVID. And we're just in the middle of trying to figure out what it is that we can all do with the scale that we'll be able to produce, simple things that will help people come back and be together. And I think that's one of the ways that the field is really learning we can apply what it is that we do to the sort of health and well-being of people, as opposed to giving them an art product.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, in this talk about thinking about what we provide, and I know you've talked about the role of artists as a priority for you during this time, and the role that they play in maintaining this connection to the well-being of community, but also their own well-being. And I'm wondering if you can share, you know, that priority that you've just kind of kept on through this time and maintained.
Sure. You know, when the pandemic hit and, you know, we were panicked. Dance Theater of Harlem is not an institution with an endowment. We barely have a cash reserve, certainly not anything that was going to save us. And we had to make some quick decisions. And where we leaned into initially was we were all going to shoulder the weight together. We did a rotating furlough process to kind of buy ourselves some time and save as much cash as possible. As an institution, we have prioritized our employees, but especially the dancers of our company. The unemployment numbers for arts and culture is off the charts. Over 50% of dancers, musicians, visual artists are unemployed. And for us, it was important for us to maintain our commitment to our artists, to our dancers, by keeping them employed. And the way that we were able to do that is we basically expanded their role. They became instructors in our school. So our dancers are the ones who are teaching the students all across the country and all across the world. They are also the ones that are creating our digital content, and they are really good at it, I have to say. But it has also made us really think about our structure and the model that we want to be building into the future. Because my opinion of this moment is that it's a dress rehearsal, that this isn't a moment in time and then we will go back to normal, maybe next year, maybe the year after that, that this is an opportunity for us to learn and understand what sort of systems do we need to put into place, what do our organizations need to look like. Nancy's important point of view, you know, a statement earlier, what does sustainability look like for our institutions? You know, I think that these are the kind of questions that we are having to ask ourselves, but for us as an institution, it has been very, very important that we keep our dancers employed, even though we will probably not see a stage for quite some time. But it's a commitment that we have held dear.
And I wonder if this time has like revealed things to you about your community or your mission that you're ready to kind of build on and address. I'll ask you that question, Nancy. If there are things that have come to light that you thought, oh, this needs to be addressed, like how do we begin to think about this differently and regain some sense of meaning over this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I just love everything Anna and Josephine have shared. You know, the initial entity that MoCA was, its precursor, was called the New York Chinatown History Project, co-founded by Jack Chen and Charlie Lai, a community activist and scholar. And I think, you know, the mission and the name changed about 15 years ago to Museum of Chinese in America. And I think what happens when you're in a community that where it was originally a Chinatown history project and now you have a national mandated mission, it's tricky because you need to balance both serving your home community and then also serving as a national anchor. And that's really, I think, the pressure and the tension that MoCA has right now. And we don't have the resources to serve all the aspects of what we want to do. But as we build and some of, we are moving forward and acquiring a permanent home, building out the space to have 10 times more core exhibit and doing a lot of that work, but that'll take 3 to 4 years. So I think the other big question is, and the word that we really need to unpack is, what is community? Let's be truthful with all, is community the group of people we serve on a broad basis? I mean, I think we throw around the community in a very, oddly enough, exclusive way, and it excludes people. And that's the irony of the word and the contradiction. So people drop community to me all the time, and I'm just like, I don't feel part of your community. And what is that? So I think we should really be careful about the use of that word and make sure that it's truly inclusive, because there's that contradiction there. And just to really walk the talk and giving individuals, your user groups, your constituency groups, space to have that individual sense of self. And to be more of that person when they go through your exhibit programs, whatever it might be. And I think that that's it. But the one big thing I would love to see, and I know that there may be some foundations on the call, is a fund of funds, right? A fund of funds, like in the finance sector, is sort of like, what, if you have hypothetically 1,000 small cultures applying for money, and foundations are trying to discern between 1,000, it's really, really hard. But if you have community anchors, like community foundations within these BIPOC communities that say, hey, we know these community groups and we know how to be more equitable about this, I feel like that's a big missing part of the funding cycle here. It's like that fund of funds, that foundation of foundations in BIPOC communities that create more sustainability. Because otherwise, you know what? I don't want to be the check the box. And I say this, and people might shoot me in the foot for this. I don't want to be the check the box Chinese American organization that gets the funding when other people don't, because it was easier for people to do that work.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the fund of funds comment too. I mean, I think being in the foundation kind of space during this time, I will say that the conversations that we're having have become a way more transparent, and I dare say a little experimental in approach to thinking about how we support the entire sector and the ways in which we affirm each other's work rather than like burden the grantees with lots of like mixed messaging and different ways of doing things and different sets of expectations. So thank you for your comment about the fund of funds. And in that spirit of like experimentation and iteration, has there even been space for you all at this time? And this is a question for any of you, to think about that. Have you been able to experiment with things, and have you been able to learn through that experimentation yet, or is it too soon?
I can jump in first. I want to applaud the fund of funds idea and the experimentation concept in foundations. Go. In terms of iteration, I think specifics with us notwithstanding, I think it's such a great moment right now for us, for every organization to do an analysis of how you want to inculcate new patterns of behavior as we come back, right? That there's ways in which we were stuck in how we operated. One of the things that we're looking at, and actually this started before COVID, is this is where my staff rolled their eyes, is when I say, let's blow up the dance presenting model. Let's talk about performance being one of the things that we do when we have a residency of dancers in town. Let's figure out how to do this so that we reshape how it is that we welcome people into a dance experience, not just a dance performance. And that's going to take some a real critical review of how we structured things, because right now we have this aperture to kind of come back into the space in a way that we didn't operate before. And it's true, it's going to be different for every single organization, how you how you analyze that. But I think it's a really, really important thing for every organization to do. If you are committed to the things that, resonate in the research about connecting with people, being more relevant, giving hope, joy, meaning, how can you change what you do to get you closer to giving that thing that we're here to do? And we're trying to, again, blow up all the ways that we did things and reimagine how to do them. One of the things is we're taking a program that has long time been in the schools, where we bring artists into schools, we do residencies and performances there. We're taking it, we're adding on community centers, libraries, parks to that. Again, in this way of like, why do we keep this? I mean, not that, schools need it too, right? We'll continue to do that work. But let's open up some of the things that we haven't opened up before.
I have lots of questions from our audience that I try to address as many as we can. But the first question comes from Michael Wasserman. Are any of the panelists teaming with other arts organizations on projects in order to help sustain and expand your community? So partnerships, have any new partnerships come up for you all during this time?
I would say yes. There's a couple of things that are happening. I think that there is a greater sense of community within the arts and cultural sector, particularly in New York City. And so I am responding to this question in two ways. One, I think there's been a greater sense of communication, sharing of information, advocacy, coming together to advocate on behalf of our sector. I think that that's an important partnership, and I want to bring it to this conversation, because while it may not be specific to a program that Dance Theater of Harlem is doing, or something that is specific to us, it is equally important because it is about ensuring that our organizations collectively are sustained through this, that we are paid attention to by our elected officials. And so we are experiencing a great deal with respect to that there is a lot of conversation, a lot of coming together, a lot of partnership around that piece. In terms of programming and sort of thinking ahead, surprisingly, what we are seeing are organizations and entities that are not from the cultural community that are wanting to partner. Not to say that there is anything wrong, or that the cultural community is not doing that, but we are experiencing a lot of conversations that are coming from technology, science. We have a project that we're doing with Columbia University's neuroscience division. So there are interesting collaborations, and what I think is most exciting is these groups that are thinking outside of the box, that they're coming to arts and culture, relating to us in a very, very different way, which I think is very promising for the future.
Thank you. So this next question is from David Pankratz. Some organizations have taken the shift to digital as an opportunity to provide their content nationally and internationally, and as a chance to expand their ticket sales and donations. In this trend, is there a threat to locally focused engagement with our community? So in this approach to digital and the expansion, does the local community, is it under threat? Is that connection under threat? How do you see that?
Quickly respond to that, because I think MoCA has definitely seen a 10 to 20-fold increase in participants, and we're not creating any barrier to entry, so there's no fee. So we decided in this time that we would make everything free virtual programming to, one, just give people something to do with their children during story time or whatever it might be in terms of content that we really felt it's more important for people to view, experience our content than it is for the small revenue component, which even with admissions revenue when we were open, it only made up 3% of our total revenue. So tiny, so tiny. But I do think without the physicalness, we have 180 partners, and that goes through a huge spectrum of different types of partners. But a lot of the schools that we had locally, obviously we are not interacting with them at all. And they would typically be physically in the space. They would, and so that's really been a huge hole for us in the past. So I do think that there is something around that when you're interacting with those groups in the community physically around you, like a sort of a 5-mile radius, you're hearing from them. You're not just presenting to them, you're listening to them. So I do feel that I'm out of touch with what those children, what the fourth graders, we would listen to them all the time. The parents would come in. So, and then there are other groups that have been so much more wonderfully servant oriented to the Chinatown community in terms of preparing food and things like that. Welcome to Chinatown, think Chinatown. So many specific groups have been doing that work. And we're not in that place to do that work because we're still focusing on our content. But it is like we've been unfortunately strayed with that immediate contact with the 5-mile radius. So we're looking forward to seeing them again.
Yeah, I mean, so there are a couple of questions coming up about this digital conundrum, right? So I'm going to ask it in a different kind of way. So one is, do you guys see a translation for digital to as a revenue producing stream for you? And then two, in this connection with your communities and addressing the kind of the gaps in service and the divide that we all know exists in communities and access to digital, how do you begin to, can you address that in your, with using digital platforms and trying to reach the communities that your mission and institutions were expressly built for?
I'll jump in. For us, I don't think the growth into digital is primarily about creating an earned income stream. I'll just be frank. I think, if like most arts organizations, we'll be entrepreneurial about it. If we get something that we want to do that we think we could bring a little revenue in with, then we'll try to figure that out. But the impetus is, and this is just my personal opinion, but there are so many digital providers in the for-profit world that do it so much better, have so much more resources, have a whole infrastructure and business model that does earn them money. I just think it's not a rebuild of a nonprofit typically to make that kind of pivot so that digital starts to become like a major source of income. I don't know if Nancy and Anna have a different opinion, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There are very few programs that we have that are paid content, and those that we do, the most that we charge is $5-7. It's not anything that we are considering a significant earned revenue stream. In fact, the events where we do have a ticketed event, the money is meant to pay for the artists, the guest artists that are on the program. So that is really the only reason why we would do that. I think for us, it's about expanding our family, that it is inviting more people to understand who we are and to experience our work, to experience our mission, with the hope that perhaps when we do get back into live performance, they may become ticket buyers, or they may become donors, or families in our school. But it is really about the expansion of our family more so than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And exactly what they said.
Thank you. So I have a question, like, how do I phrase this? So in thinking about there are assumptions sometimes that when we talk about focusing on community, there is a sacrifice of artistic excellence, right? That we're not thinking about artistic excellence. Do you continue to feel this tension? Are there ways to address it? You know, have you found, do you ignore it? Like, how did?
I'll jump in. So no, I don't think we experience that tension at all. You know, when Dance Theater of Harlem was created, Mr. Mitchell was out to dispel the myth that Black people could not do ballet. And that people of color could participate in this art form, and not only participate in this art form, but excel in this art form. And so excellence is at the core of what we do. And sharing that with communities. It is not about giving sort of the weakened version of that, because it does not serve why we exist. You know, we exist because we want to, we embrace this belief that ballet belongs to everyone and that it should reflect the diversity of this country. And we want all people to be able to experience it. And so we don't necessarily experience that tension, but I think it's largely because our mission and our values really speak to what is the art that we're going to put forward. And it is always of excellence, because we're out to show that all types of people can do this work.
And I would say, you know, ditto. We think about excellence all the time. We assume it. It's a basis for what we do, but we don't obsess about it. We just do it and move on to making sure that people have access to it, making sure that what the medium is engaging and relevant to all different kinds of people. And on the notion of excellence, when you're dedicated to serving people and building community through producing art and presenting art and making it with other people, there is an excellence in the way you do that you have to be just as rigorous about as you do in the sort of, you know, aesthetic thoughts that we usually refer to excellence. And I don't want people to dismiss the processes that need and must be excellent with respect to serving people and making art with people.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you all more. I appreciate your answers around that. I'd like to just bring Madeline back into the conversation. I'm sorry, just to have all of our folks, all of our panelists together. I don't know, Madeline, if there's anything you heard in the conversation that kind of piqued interest around the survey and what it can uncover for us, just before we wrap up.
Yeah, of course. So many interesting things were shared during this panel and in the Q&A. Just to speak to a couple of the digital pieces that have come up, we actually will be fielding a second wave of the survey in the spring of 2021. That'll serve as a bit of a tracking study to understand how things have changed for Americans. But we've expanded the focus of the study to really have a renewed focus on understanding where social justice and other social causes fit in the arts and culture landscape now. And we will be also building out the digital engagement section a little bit more to understand a little bit more how people are engaging and what they're getting out of it, if they're getting value out of it, and where revenue plays into that a little bit. If they're willing to pay for something, why they might be willing to pay for something, or if they're engaging with things that are outside of their local community, what do they get from that, and how do they imagine that might affect their participation patterns moving forward? So certainly questions that have come up during this conversation are things that we've been talking about as well.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. On that note, we've run out of time, so we'll have to wrap things up, but many thanks to Anna, Josephine, and Nancy for your time today. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And I'd also like to thank Madeline. The research from Slover Lynette has been invaluable to the field now more than ever. And a big thank you to all of you who joined us We know how busy you are, and we appreciate your spending the hour with us. Wallace will be sending you a brief survey on this session, and we'll continue this conversation on our blog later this month. Thank you again, and please keep an eye out for our upcoming conversations in this series, Reimagining the Future of the Arts. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Bahia.
Thanks.
Thank you.